Okay, everybody, let's take a deep breath, put our seatbelts on. We're going to be diving in here. So first of all, thanks everybody for September's, geez, school started and I'm already looking forward to fall break. Thanks everybody for joining us today. I was just going to quickly remind everybody, go over the housekeeping items. These webinars we do, it's really just in my former life, we called them peaking training, taking our existing system admins and getting them additional training. So it's really nice for, as people come and go in the organization or change roles, it's also good for bringing on new system admins, getting them comfortable so they can take control of the plane while it's in the air, not crash it. So that's kind of the purpose on this. We're going to do a couple of things here. We changed the format a little bit. We're going into 30-minute sessions, if you will. So we'll bounce that around a little bit. Go from there. We do realize 90 minutes is a big block of your time. So we do a couple of things. Andrew in our marketing department, he takes the recordings from these. He gets them rendered, posted on our website, broken up into the sessions. So you have those as a reference material. Mike, at some point when you're in there, maybe you can pull up Issuetrak.com, remind people where the webinar recordings are, so that'll be helpful. So you have that. You can also come and go. So your link to get you into the webinar, if you have a scheduling conflict, you can leave and then bounce back. So Paul and I, while Mike's presenting, will be monitoring the chat logs. There's also a Q&A page, but I'm not currently monitoring that. Mike and Paul respond at the appropriate time if you all have access to that. So I know in webinars past, people have posted questions. I'm not currently monitoring that, so use the chat. We'll take that information and respond to you directly, and then as appropriate, we'll pull it into the presenters to cover those topics as well. So today's, we're gonna do a 30 minutes on change management and best practices, how Issuetrak supports those change management processes. Our deep dive is on the task manager and best practices for tasking. So those two kind of support each other because part of change management is managing that change process. Those two items support each other well. 15 minutes on the, on the best practice and the task manager. We're changing that one up a little bit. It's really going to be customer driven. So attendee driven, we're going to be taking the questions that are coming in, and I'll be feeding those to Mike and Paul. They're going to be the two presenters for that session. Just the task manager is a complicated beast, you know, so we can unbefuddle a lot of that stuff for you and then share the best practices that Mike and Paul are so well versed on. We're going to do 15 minutes on new feature. I forget exactly what the new feature is, but the developers have been just cranking out feature releases. The stuff that we're seeing on our internal meetings that's going to be hitting in the next 30, 60, 90 days is just really, really impressive. And then we always close with a quick Q&A session. So that's it for the agenda. Let's see, the presenters. So I'm Tony Lovelace. I'm one of the account managers here. I'll be doing the moderation. That's my mug shot so we can keep moving along. The next one, that's Mike Wright, Senior Product Engineer. He's worn all the different hats here at Issuetrak. He frequently goes by the Wizard of Oz. So if you need something off the wall done in your Issuetrak, thinking it's nearly impossible, Mike's probably already done it. And then the baby of the group here is Paul Harris. He's consummate professional. He's one of my go-to guys with Mike. So they're really, really knowledgeable on the product. There are product experts of record. And if there's a way to get it done, these two gentlemen can make it happen in your Issuetrak. So that said, I'm going to turn it over to you, Mike.
All right, Tanya, let me get this dumb thing out of my way, and then we'll get moving since I'm doing a lot of presentation here. Okay, so today we're going to be doing change management. So I wanted to do an entire webinar session on change management, and we want to look at it from a couple of different perspectives. I thought it would be good to do a lot of the basics, so skip my mug shot and we kind of move forward. But I thought we'd go to the basics and then come back out and look at how Issuetrak can help out. So we're going to kind of end up. So first off, I went and just looked up change management and just did a quick Google search. And this Oxford Dictionary came up. You know, management of changes in development within a business or similar organization, controlled identification and implementation of required changes within the computer system. Well, yeah, but then you get into a Wikipedia article and it kind of really expands. And I think that's really what change management's all about. You look at it as change, but it's not just change IT related, business processes, teams, user access. When you look at this big definition, it covers an approach really to not only control the change, but also to report on the change and make sure the changes that you're making are going to meet the organizational objectives, and a lot of times support processes and even regulatory directives that have to come up with changes that are being made. And it doesn't need to be big companies. I recently worked with a small financial company, and they were mandated by one of their large partners to come in and institute a change management process. And really, it's, you know, it's only two people involved in all decisions making and implementations of changes within there, but they needed a formal process in order to meet their mandates to work with this larger entity. So you never know exactly where you're going to need this. The main thing is to understand the Issuetrak, understand the process and understand the demand. And then within Issuetrak, then we can format what you need. In that small system, all I needed to do was have one person submit the issue and the other person review and say they approved it. That was as simple as it gets. Essentially, you're just having two people review a process, one to submit it and the other to review and approve. And it met the objective of what that particular financial institution needed to demonstrate to meet its auditing requirements, because they have to also have requirements that are coming down and affecting that smaller group. In large organizations, it's usually going to be teams or groups, committees that are involved. It may be multiple approvals that need to be made. So the idea behind this is to meet the need. And you can see in this particular demonstration from this Wikipedia article on change management, you've got all types of it, from software changes, service management changes, you've got organizational restructuring. It comes from competitive pressure, acquisitions, customer demands. All of this is putting pressure on our systems within our companies to make modifications. And with the world that we're living in right now, those changes are coming from all over. Whether it happens to be a COVID-19 response, whether it happens to be regulatory or even regulatory changes that are needed to be made, or even right now political mandates that are because of the changing environments we operate within the United States right now that are coming in and affecting our organization. So it's a lot of changes that are going to be made and a lot of things we're going to be facing over the next year or two, especially, and then continuing on as these particular changes need to be addressed. Change happens. The idea is to control the change, make sure that things are recorded, and the impact upon your users is as small as possible. So let's take a look at a couple of other things. And I like this particular slide. I actually ran across this again, doing some research for this particular thing. And this came from the University of of Cincinnati, and it was their IT team that was talking about the purposes and objectives of the actual change management process. And it came up with some statements that I thought were very important and very relevant to this particular topic today. Number one, ensure that changes are made with minimum disruption to the services IT has committed to its users. Support the efficient and prompt handling of all changes. It doesn't matter if it's IT or not. That statement right there says exactly what we're trying to do. We need to manage the change. We need to go in there and plan the change and make sure that whatever change is going to occur is not only being done in an efficient manner, but it has minimum disruption to the services that we're providing to whoever it happens to be, our customer, whoever our customer is. And it could be an external customer as well as an internal customer. For example, we're doing some changes in our finance department. Well, those changes could have some drastic effect upon our support of you, our customer. So we have to be very careful of that. We plan those changes, make sure that there's no disruption. And if a disruption occurs, address it in a professional and honest manner. So there are things that has to happen. How are you going to address a disruption? What type of disruptions? Identify what they are and how you're going to address them. Provide accurate and timely information about the changes. Well, sometimes we make changes, and I've been involved in more changes. If you're on Google or you're on a lot of programs these days, changes come to you and you don't even know that they were coming. You know, on Tuesday, you're going to get an update patch from Microsoft. You know, it's Patch Tuesday. Well, what happens? Microsoft downloads a patch, and all of a sudden, you've got a change to your user settings. You've got a new feature. You know, you don't know a whole lot unless you're really invested in following Microsoft's update packages. So you want to provide accurate information. You want to make sure that information is timely. So if something changes to the patch that you're about to do or the changes you make sure that everybody's informed. So it looks like item 3. Ensure all changes are consistent with business and technical plans and strategies. I thought this was an interesting statement. Many times we have to do small or large changes. We may just be changing a particular record, but we have to make sure that any change that we make doesn't affect what's going to happen in the future or which direction we have. For example, even with the Issuetrak, we have to ensure that changes to our product don't interfere with our ability to go ahead and do something in the future. We may be making a change now that's building for a future change that we want to make. So we're doing it a little at a time. Well, we can't interfere with what's going on with customers who already have the product. And we need to make sure that we are providing us with a technical path to a new future. So we're doing some things in here within our own systems where we have to be very aware of the technical plans and strategies that we have for the product as well as our current business operations. We also want to ensure that there's a consistent approach is used for all groups who request changes. In other words, you want to have some consistency of how the process is going to work. And that's where Issuetrak comes into play a lot of times. You know, if you're used to putting an Issuetrak issue in for a help desk issue, you go in and make a change request in there. You can have some consistency within the setup of those particular forms so people are very comfortable with it. And whether it happens to be a service request or a change request or whatever type request it happens to be, you can have consistency in the approach of how all of that works, because pretty much it works the same way. It's just who it's routed to and how it's defined. Provide additional functionality and performance enhancements to systems while maintaining an acceptable level of user services. Hey, we need to know what change is going to happen. How is it going to actually affect? Usually you want changes to occur to do a couple of different things. Correct a mistake, correct a problem, or you want to enhance the features that are out there or enhance performance of your product. And we do that a lot. We're enhancing functionality of Issuetrak. We're improving its performance in areas where it's deficient. We're striving to improve everything that we do. So we have to control those changes and make sure that the changes are have properly meet all the requirements we've already talked about. In addition, we want to reduce the ratio of changes that need to be backed out of the system due to an inadequate preparation or to a failure of the change meeting the goal that we needed. So maybe we didn't do our due diligence. We didn't look at how that change is going to affect our operations or our user experiences. So we want to make sure that when we make those changes that we've controlled all of the environmental issues that are there. We want to inform our users. We want to make sure we've made all those steps and taking care of all those steps before we make the change. Notification's a big thing. You know, prepare them that a change is coming. We're moving to a new phone system. Well, we've been talking about this new phone system for about 3 to 4 weeks now. So we're preparing for a new phone system to come by making sure that all of our users are aware of what changes it's going to make to our normal operations. Minimize the total number of unplanned changes. Now, if you haven't heard the term unplanned changes, it's something that needs to change in that environment that was not planned for. Maybe we found that we needed to go in and run an update on a system that we didn't know where the update was there, or we wanted to go in and we needed to fix something. An unplanned change a lot of times is a fix. You don't want to have to do that. So it's better to go ahead and plan out what you're going to do so you don't have as many of these unplanned changes. Unplanned changes have higher risk a lot of times because you don't know exactly what's going to happen because you haven't had time to plan it out and determine what the risks were and plan for the risk. The other thing that you're looking for here is ensure that the required level of technical and management accountability is maintained for every change. Approvals. Making sure you get all of the approvals done at all the levels for every change that you're trying to make, whether it happens to be small or large. You're making sure that everything is meeting your regulatory and your business obligations to make sure that it's being reviewed properly and make sure that everybody who could potentially be affected by a change is notified. Sometimes you can make a change in one system and it affects the way other people go ahead and work. That change then you would want to review for all what change is going to be affected across all areas of the company in order to make sure that that particular team is also aware and can approve that particular change. And then finally it comes down to reporting. Monitor the number, the reason, the type, and the associated risk of the changes. You want to always have reporting done. How many changes have you made? How many unplanned changes have you had? How many planned changes? How many large changes? Whatever it happens to be. How many have you done? What reason were the changes out there? What type of changes were they? You know, and did you get the risk information before you even started? The associated risk, sometimes people will do and sometimes they won't. But the understanding is that, you know, you have an understanding of what the change is going to entail and how it could affect you before you make it. Now here at the bottom, I listed out the link from the document that I pulled. So I've got the PDF document down here at the bottom that you can pull up. Also, I found one from Alaska, for University of Alaska, where they were doing a very similar document where they went through essentially a overview of, it says pink scan here. It's really pink elephant. So if you're aware of ITIL, they were looking at ITIL and some of the information that it was going to affect them and how they thought it was going to affect their operations. Good reading is background if you need more information about change management. I just thought it was really a good document to use here. So let's go ahead and go forward a little bit. I thought this was interesting and it originally came out, it really recently happened. CenturyLink outage led to a 3.5% drop in global web traffic. This was a change that went wrong. And I got this link actually here. It's from an article that went out from ZDNet and I read it. They made a change at CenturyLink. And if you're not familiar with CenturyLink, so CenturyLink is essentially a internet provider. My mother happens to use CenturyLink. And they made a change in one of the softwares is called FlowSpec. And this is what it says. It was a misconfigured FlowSpec rule. Well, what's interesting about this is that this FlowSpec rule propagated out into the network, into the world. And it went down and took Amazon, Twitter, Microsoft, EA, Blizzard, Steam, Discord, Reddit, Hulu, Duo Security, Impervia, Cheapflakes, OpenDNS. All of these services went down for an extended period of time before they could actually go in and address this problem. The result looks like approximately a 3% drop in total global web traffic during the period of this outage. And it wasn't maybe because the change wasn't understood. It was a mistake that was made by probably one operator behind one keyboard, but it had the impact was huge. 3.5% drop in global internet traffic is a huge amount. There's a lot of people calling Call of Duty on that day that was not happy. So you know, a lot of these are gaming systems in here. Of course, Amazon and Twitter, big people that you're looking at. But it's just an example of how change can affect a large area, and sometimes if it's not controlled properly or monitored properly. So I really I thought that was an interesting little article that's out there. And again, I've got the link in here. But how one change can affect so many people. And we're talking about millions. Now, let's move forward a little bit. So, what are some of the challenges and risk of change? Resistance to change. I've been doing this for over 20 years. And when we talk about changes, and even changes just in implementing Issuetrak, this is probably one of the biggest things we always hear about. People are just flat out resistant to making a change. I'm sure every one of you sitting and listening in this audience hears that. You know, people don't want to make a change. People are going to push back. I don't want to do this because they don't want to change. They're comfortable with how things have been working. They think their paper forms are fine. We need to move to electronic. The way they do business has been fine for 20 years. Why do we need to change? But as we say, we live in a fast-moving environment. We live in a different environment than we have in the past, and changes need to occur. So you have to address that. And documentation, planning, the things that you want to do in your change process can address that. Sometimes I hear you want some champions. Champions in the local areas of where those changes are going to be. Some people who are either involved with the change, and so they're involved with the planning, or people who are involved with the need to make a change and how it's going to affect them in a positive way, not a negative way. So you want champions a lot of times when you're looking for resistance to change. Another thing that I thought was scope creep. I cannot tell you, Tony will come in and get a customer who's interested in putting in Issuetrak. And he'll say, Mike, this is going to be a really simple system, blah, 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 blah. Done, simple and done. 2 months later, I come back, well, you remember the one I talked about? Well, other people got involved with it. Now it looks like there's 3 or 4 other groups and they can't make up their mind to move forward or not. Yeah, you know, scope creep. You know, this change can affect that change, can affect this system and that system, and you've got to understand the scope of the product. You know, we always say try to keep it small and then expand later. Sometimes, you know, you've got to decide if it's going to have scope creep. There's got to be you've got to have a reason for it, and you've got to manage the scope creep. Sometimes you've got to say no more. It's got to stop right now. Then we've got to just move forward with what we have and then come back. So it says this is especially a threat in change management situation. So be careful about that, because it can lead to, okay, this has to change and that has to change and that has to change. Be aware of it, manage it as well as you can. Another thing is loss of information in the conversion. This is always a fear. But if you manage the change and you do it in a managed way where you're really trying to get a good analysis of all of the risk, where you're trying to plan it correctly, then you're minimizing any risk to the loss of information. For example, you know, SQL Server upgrade. Do your backups first. Make sure you've got a backup, you know. Build that into your process. Make sure that that's done. Software changes will be the same way. Make sure there's a path back. You know, if you can go forward, you may want to make sure that you've got a good backup plan, and you want to have a restore plan so that you can do that. So it's a lot of different information you have. You've got to make sure that you can do it. Even sometimes in an issue track, not an issue track, but sometimes in a software conversion, you may have a period of time where you're going to be down. For example, you may be doing, a big accounting system setup, and you may have maybe a week that you're going to be down while you're moving from one system to another. You've got to have a plan in place so that you don't lose work during that period of time. So loss of information in the conversion can be a very big change, a big challenge and risk to a change process. And then I added this one to it: poorly defined processes. I put this in here kind of from my own perspective because I've run into situations with customers who have poorly or no processes defined. They didn't understand they did work, but as far as being able to verbalize what that work was and how it was done, they couldn't do it. And what happens with that is if you don't understand the process and you don't understand how the changes are made, it's very difficult for you to build a process on a system like Issuetrak, because you have to understand what needs to be documented or not documented, added to Issuetrak or not added to Issuetrak. So go in and make sure that you understand what you're doing. I always say document or build the processes first before you even sit down to Issuetrak. So you can get into situation, now put in here Hunger Games starts now, because you can get into situations if you don't have a good documented change process, the finger pointing can start. And then unfortunately, you're looking at jobs, you're looking at promotions, you're looking at things like that. It can feed off of each other, and it could something like the Hunger Games. Everybody's pointing fingers at each other. You don't want that to happen. You want to work as a team. So define your process, dig down. Go to the lowest levels if you have to. I've had that happen where situation came in and the management understood the process, but the worker bees were doing something different. So understand everybody involved in the change area. So want to get some final thoughts. And my final thoughts today kind of were a little bit about some of the things that I think are good ideas to have when you're thinking about change management. Decide to examine your processes, where I started. Because when you start looking at putting Issuetrak in place or any other software in place to help you control your processes, understand your processes, understand that and document. I like workflows when I'm doing this, but a list is fine. As long as you understand that this has to do, this has to be done, this has to be done. And again, it comes down to sometimes you're trying to document for auditing purposes or to make sure that that what you're doing is meeting regulatory obligations. Include it in your documentation, include it into your original run through of that process. Examine that process, look for, it's a good opportunity when you're doing something like putting it in Issuetrak to look for the holes. Where are we being deficient in this process? Where is this process working? Where is it not working? Use the time to examine it, because it's really going to be important as you try to build this in Issuetrak, because once it's built, that's what you're trying to follow for the rest of the time. And as I said at the beginning of this, size does not matter. Large or small companies need change control. Now, it depends on your business. It depends on your needs. It depends on what environment that you're looking at. But again, you can be involved in a small company who still needs the ability to change, to create change control, to make sure they're operating in a good controlled environment. Decide what should be recorded and what is required to be recorded at your company. Sometimes process steps don't absolutely all need to be recorded. Sometimes when I put something in Issuetrak, and we'll talk about the task manager in the next session, but sometimes in there, it can actually record 4 or 5 steps that are done because the steps are not important. It's the final output is done. For example, do I really need to say that I'm going to create an Active Directory account and give you this access? No, what's important is that the user account's been created and the access been granted. I don't need all the steps to get there. I just need to know it's been done. So you decide what needs to be recorded and what is required to be recorded. That's one of the things that I recommend. Your failure to control or document change could result in loss of customers, regulatory issues, loss of accreditation, and finally, a potential loss of livelihoods. Risk will be different for different companies and teams. Understand that, because remember, some things in a failure to control could lead to major problems, especially on a regulatory environment, and especially even on audits. People have lost jobs sometimes because of that. And finally, document your processes and use an application of some type to track your adherence to your process, whether it's Issuetrak or not. And you're Issuetrak people, so you better be using Issuetrak. But at least if you've documented your process, you put it into an Issuetrak issue, then you can go ahead and work through this. Now, some of the things that Issuetrak provides you. So what are the tools we're going to be looking at? Now, as we look at this, we look at issue types in order to both control the type of, both control it and to report on the type of changes. We're looking at the task manager to look at how we're going to build a process through it and document the approvals. Quick picks to launch that task manager. We're going to use reporting in order to report on those changes, and the knowledge base sometimes to document what's involved in those changes and even processes. And finally, projects. Sometimes we want to group multiple issues together that are changes into one large project issue so we can report on them better. So you have a lot of tools within Issuetrak that can be used in order to help you with your change management. And those are where Paul and Tony and I come into play. So if you need to talk about change management or questions about it, make sure that you come to us and we'll be happy to discuss any features or any improvements that we can use. So with that, Tony, I'm going to go ahead and say and open it up a little bit for questions. If anybody's got anything that they would like to talk about on this subject or share with the other attendees on this subject, let me know.
Sure, thanks, Mike. I was chatting with somebody, and they were, because you know how change management is so task heavy, if you will, or
yes,
whether it's on the approvals, the implementations, the backouts, just all those details in there. And I was chatting with somebody, and it sounds like, and you only get so much in a chat conversation, it sounds like they have a large task list, but then they're having trouble closing the issue when they still have open tasks that really don't apply.
Yep.
And I was trying to explain to them in the chat that, yeah, there's some easy ways to implement that. Could you show them that?
Let me see if I've got one in here somewhere. Yeah, Paul, have you got IT training open?
I can have it open in a second here.
Let's go ahead and I'm going to let Paul actually do this one, and then we'll kind of talk it together. But if that's okay with you, Mr. Paul.
That's great.
All right. The idea behind this is sometimes we want to do a cleanup task. Let's see. I'm going to stop my share, Paul, so you can start yours.
That's the term I was thinking of.
Yeah. What
cleanup
we're trying to do here is have an easy way to clean up a bunch of open tasks, because it can happen. So Paul's going to show you how it can be done.
Right. So what I'm going to do, I have some more materials that Mike and I are going to use here. I'm just going to open up, and this is one of our example sites, and we have a couple. If you guys ever want to see how Issuetrak can be set up. So let me see here.
This is our go-to site. We kind of go through this.
See if I typed my password correctly. Yeah. And Mike, you want me to pick one that's out there, I think?
Yeah, go ahead and pick one that's out there.
Let's see if we can.
Hope it's got tasks.
Well, as most of us know, because we all use Issuetrak, you can see the.
Yeah, that looks like a good one.
That looks like a real good one, doesn't it? You can see these little green letters, numbers right here that tell us there are tasks on that issue.
Yeah.
Hey, Paul, can you zoom in a little bit if that's not going to mess up your rendering?
Sure. Let me get the issue open, and then we'll.
My arms aren't long enough to hold my laptop far enough away to see that. Thanks.
Oh, wait a minute.
That's a little too far, Paul. Whoa, Paul.
Let me. Yeah. Whoa. Let me get it back.
Tony's not completely blind.
How's that? A little bit better?
Yeah.
There we go.
So let's go through this one. In this particular case, there's a lot of this. This is actually happens to be a change control one. We get down here to schedule the change and we decide we don't want to do anymore. Okay, so now it's a task complete. So we
Right.
can't get through that. We either have to mark it as complete or we've got to essentially do something to close everything else out.
Right.
So one of the things you can do is you can actually go to the notify affected users and click on that and do an edit. Now you've got to have the rights to do this. And when you do that, you can change it over. In this particular case, go to the top. Now I'd go to the top and change it over from a completion to a yes, no is the way I would do it.
That's right.
And then at the bottom, I would give the cancel all open tasks and close issue on the NA is the way I would do it.
So you think right here.
Yeah, do that. So what's going to happen is in this particular case, what I've done is says, okay, nothing else is applicable because I'm going to close this out. So I don't want to say yes and I don't want to say no to this particular task, but I just want to close everything out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark it as an NA and it's going to close the open task on this issue.
And I promise it will. There you go.
You see how I'd marked them at the bottom there. Now what I would do is add a note to the issue saying, you know, whatever happens to be, you're going to add a note and state that this particular closes and being this particular issue now needs to be closed because we've decided not to make the change or whatever it happens to be. We stop the process. And it doesn't matter how many tasks are open, it'll close them all. It'll get rid of them all. Sometimes I build a task into a process that's got a cleanup step. I had one customer that I work with that had about 20 different managers that needed to review a potential change. And not all of them needed to actually do anything. So what would happen is we'd get 4 or 5 of them that would respond, that were involved, and the rest of them wouldn't do anything. So they'd be left alone in a situation like yours. Well, what happens? This issue's hung because nobody else is going to respond. So we added a cleanup task at the bottom that says close on complete all tasks, and we said yes to it, and it went ahead and completed it. If we didn't do that, we just put NA at the bottom of it, and it just skipped it, essentially is what it did, or remove it and delete it. So you can build that into your process if needed. And of course, now that issue is closed.
Yep. And if I refresh, that was issue 1440. And if I refresh here in our grid list, you'll see it dropped right off of our grid list because it's closed.
It's gone by now.
It came from the open issue because that was the open issues grid list.
Okay.
Great example, Paul. Good one.
Thanks, guys. Another question came up about the attendee knew we could support multiple workflows, but they just, maybe could you show us an example of how to make that happen? Because I know on my demos, I cover it a lot of times, but the attendee was asking, you know, could you show us what that looks like? Maybe
you mean like a parallel? That's what you're talking about? A parallel workflow?
Yeah,
with
parallel.
2 things are being handled
I think
at the
that's
same
what
time?
they were asking about.
Okay.
What do you think?
Trying to think of which one.
Shall we do a?
Yeah, new employee probably be good. I'd like to do that one though on the other side. Go ahead and go into the other site. CS training on that one. It's a little bit different.
And you and me both. I think this is a little bit better. This is our newer. This site is a little bit newer. It's another example site that we use, and everybody can feel free to access this after today's webinar, and we'll put the URL out there.
This actually is going to replace the IT training site. We're going to refresh that. It hasn't been refreshed in years, so we're going to refresh it with this new information from here. The idea on this one is kind of in parallel because we need to have multiple teams working at the same time to accomplish a goal, essentially what we need to do. So what we did on the employee new, and go ahead and select that, is we set up essentially a dependency order so that all of the questions that a manager would have to respond to were all added at the same time. And then we would route additional tasks to go to different teams. So you can have facilities and IT and HR, manager. You can have a whole lot of other tasks routed to other people that all need to happen at the same time or can happen in parallel, essentially. We don't care exactly when they're done. We just like to get them all done before the person comes to work. So go ahead and do the full-time on the, no, don't do the full, yeah, do the full-time. Go ahead, do the full-time.
Hey,
So
Paul,
it's a full-time employee.
Oh, yeah.
left.
and say, yes, he's working remote once
Thank
you do that.
How's that? There we go.
So this is the questions that we're answering. And then what happens is on this particular case, if you say yes, don't do the insurance, do the rest of them, Paul.
All right. So the IT's got one flow that has to happen.
Yeah, so when he does that, then it's going to refresh and add a task at the bottom that says he needs to go out and set up VPN. And the next one should go out there and do up everything else now. See here, task on prep and deliver laptop goes to IT. If he needs a desktop, he'll do the same thing.
Why not? He needs both.
Yeah, we're doing both. He's a traveler.
He's, an important guy. He needs another monitor.
Yeah.
And we'll give him a printer and a phone.
And then put not applicable on insurance for now. But as you see down at the bottom now, there may be other teams involved, but you can have as many people involved in different areas, and all of those tasks have the same dependency orders. So they can all be completed together. The thing is, the scheduled training and orientation would need to be done after all the delivery of all of the equipment, so that you could do all the training and orientation with the customer after they were done. So it makes it looks a little funky, but it actually works in the order that it needs to occur. Yeah. So IT would do that, and whatever it happens to do.
Can't even do this step yet. Can't even get there yet, right? Because I haven't completed all the dependencies yet.
Does that answer your question on doing it in parallel?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to explain to him. Had another one come in. It had to do with the attendee was saying that they're having a hard time getting their staff to update the substatus, that they always forget. And I said, oh wait, that's a super easy one, low-hanging fruit. Could you show us that one?
Paul, go ahead and do the training orientation. Yeah,
I was just talking about this with the customer yesterday, in fact, just yesterday. So substatus, let's make sure everybody's kind of on the same page first. Substatus, very handy field, right? It kind of tells us what's going on with the issue right now. What life cycle stage are we in? And it's one of my sort of pet peeves, right? I love substatus. I think this is one of the real value adds that Issuetrak has, that you can see what's going on with that issue. So the problem is that nobody wants to update that extra field to let people know what's going on, right? So how do you get it updated automatically? Well, primarily you start with a quick pick, right, to pre-fill, but that only gets us one substatus. What about as we're walking through our process? And what I wanted to show everybody, I'm going to click back into our task name here, and I'm going to edit this one the same way we did the other one a minute ago. And for a yes/no task, and now this one happens to be complete, so I'm going to change it. But for a yes/no task, we can update the substatus every time a yes/no task is offered. There's answered, right? So on a yes, we can go to a one substatus. On no, well, that's not a very good one to go to, but there we go. And on no, we can go to a different substatus. And on NA, we have the ability to go to a third.
Mm-hmm. And I've set these up to where the task itself was just to do nothing more than that.
Yep.
To move the issue from one substatus to another. And essentially that is all we do.
And from a change management perspective, you really need to know where these are.
Mm-hmm.
So leveraging that substatus, maybe as you're going through the approval cycles or
right.
layers, if you will.
The other thing that comes into play here is things like the escalation rules, because the escalation rules many times can be set off from the substatus. So it gives you an ability to say, okay, John, you are assigned task number 6. You haven't moved that particular substatus because it's still waiting for you to approve. So you could escalate that issue automatically that way.
And Rashid, this was the customer I was talking to yesterday. They had a situation where, well, how do I know that somebody hasn't done their task? They may or may not be listing right now, right? So the idea is we use the task to set the substatus, but then we can come back and monitor that with an escalation rule to make sure that's not out there forever, right? Pending approval by somebody, right? Well, if that task never gets approved, or that approval never gets done, then we use an escalation rule to find that and flag the issue. It's needing follow-up so that everybody can kind of, well, what do you need to get that approved or disapproved?
And there's one other thing that can happen in here is substatus does have a change history associated with it. So you have a time and date stamp of when that particular change of substatus was made. I have had users use that in order to determine the time between task completion. So the only thing we have is a completed date on a task. We don't have any understanding of when it was available to be completed, but this would give you the ability of when that last step and when the next step was actually completed. Why was there such a drastic difference in the completion period between that step and my step? So it does give you that from some of the reporting aspects too. So there's a lot of positives about using the substatuses with the task manager in order to document where that issue is moving.
And I think we can even show that in, see if we have a good one here. If we look at the substatus for this issue, is that text big enough? Can everybody see?
Looks good.
So we've got our substatus, and all we do is look at the history, and we can pull reporting on this. Well, this one's only been in one substatus. It's only ever.
But as you can see, the values are there.
And as soon as we change it to another substatus, you'd see another entry for when that was changed, so you'd know the dwell time. You'd know time between.
Yeah, so a lot of capabilities there.
Hey, thanks, Mike. You were talking about the substatus and how that unlocks a lot of the automation within the Issuetrak application. Can you pull up a escalation? You go to the business rules, because that's really the automation section of the application. Show us the escalation rule and how substatus is so powerful to unlocking that for us, please.
Do the auto close, Paul.
Sure. This one up here.
Yeah. That's probably the easiest one to show it off of.
Our support team loves this one.
Yeah, they use it a lot.
So I'm sure this doesn't ever happen to anybody that's listening, right? But it happens to us all the time, So, but I'm sure your customers are different than ours. Your internal or external customers are different. You set this process up, right? And then you say, okay, is this okay? Or you reach out to your internal or external customer, and you say, okay, are we good? Is this done? Can we close, right? And your internal or external customer just goes off into space, right? They never tell you whether you're okay to close, right? So you end up with something that's kind of hanging out there where you need an update, but you don't hear from that submitter. You don't hear from that person that asked for the thing, right? Like I said, I'm sure your customers are different, right? I'm sure everybody else is, but for us, Mike, that happens once in a while, right?
Yeah, because what happens, I mean, we both work support desk. So Paul and I both have worked support desk, so we know customers disappear. And the idea behind this was for us to go ahead and have some way of automated closing and automatic notification. This actually is a two-step process. Paul, go back to the list and let's show them the one before this first.
So we've got
the pre-close warning goes out first, and this is the one the support team uses. Essentially, it's a period of time while an issue has been sitting in customer response pending. So if someone's not responding to us for 3 days, there's no activity on the issue, then we want to go ahead and use that substatus to flag this escalation rule. And even though the clock is paused, as you can see on this one, we then change the substatus to pre-close warning, which is the one we were just on. And we even add a note to the issue that's being sent to the user that warns them, okay, hey, you need to go ahead and take address to this, or we're going to close this issue in 24 hours. So we notify you. So as part of our processes, whether it happens to be a change process or a support issue or service issue, then we use this in order to make sure that everything is done. And that change of the substatus just ensures that the next message is going to fire off on the closing. It's what it does. We could run multiple escalation rules based off the same substatus. Sometimes it's hard to control. So I always go ahead and add different substatuses when I'm using a different rule.
It's kind
So
of
this
the
is 1 day from last activity.
this is kind of the Issuetrak equivalent of tapping your watch, right? It's sort of, hey,
Exactly
haven't
right.
heard from you, right?
Yeah. Now it's called cleanup time.
That's right.
Boom, done.
Hey,
I'm
come
out
on.
of there. I've had customers that go in there and say, okay, I have to have a customer approval before I can close an issue. Okay, well, if it's okay, if that issue sits there in customer approval for 30 days, then you have to go and manually clean up all those issues every 30 days. Well, if not, then you can set this up to Issuetrak, customer approval pending. If it's been sitting for 30 days with no activity, automatically close the issue, get rid of it.
Yeah, let it go.
Yeah.
So Mike, I want to make sure I heard correctly. So from a best practice, like on those pre-closes, when you add the note and, say, hey, if we don't hear from you, Mr. and Mrs. Customer, we're going to close this. From a best practice, you actually update that substatus?
Yes,
Okay.
that's what I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
That's what I do.
And not
What
every
I do too.
customer can close like that. I understand that. I know I've run into several customers that, for whatever internal reasons, they can't auto do closes, but at least they can ping the customer and worry them with emails. And the support team, the way they do it, they actually have 3 substatuses that they use, and they change the wording of the note according to the time that goes by. So by the time they get to that 3rd note, then it gets, hey, we're getting serious here. We want to close this issue. You haven't responded to me for essentially 3 weeks. I need to go ahead and move this issue forward. So,
And I think the note is just as important there too, setting that expectation with the customer.
I agree with that.
They get that in the notification because a note was added, and
Yep.
that sets that expectation with the customer. Yep. Hey, if I want them to do, if this is not okay, I better respond, right?
Well, Tony, we're running long on this. We want to go over to the other side to give us a little bit more time on the other side. So it's almost 2 o'clock now. Have you got any more questions on this particular topic? If you do, let's hold them to the end.
Okay. I've been answering them via chat as well.
No problem. Okay, Paul, how about everyone? We're going to go ahead and take about a 5-minute break. We're going to pick back up at 2 o'clock, and then Paul and I are going to pick up on task and processes. Probably continue talking about some of the things we just did. So I hope that's good with everyone, but give everybody just a little bit of break before we get started at 2 o'clock. Okay?
All right.
All right.
Okay.
See you soon.